And we continue with the 11th chapter of The Embroidered Sunset by Joan Aiken. Mighty odd, Wilby said, returning to the hired Land Rover. The old girl's roamed out by herself, and Lucy's gone after her, it seems. What a day to choose for a promenade. Girl who answered the door seems to think she might have gone along to the old cottage. So we'll just nip up there and see. I must say, he added aggrievedly, it's a damn nuisance the way she always contrives to wander off just when I'm in the neighborhood. Would have saved so much trouble if I'd been able to see her at that boarding-house place in Kirby. Telepathy, maybe. She kind of senses when you're close at hand, Russ said dryly. He started the Land Rover with a lurch that caused Wilby to give him a pained look, and added reflectively, However, if she gets pneumonia and dies, you'll hardly complain, will you? That'd solve one of your problems. Why, Russ, what gave you the idea I wanted the poor old lady to die? Well, said Russ, for one thing, going to that bank in York and finding the old girl's wills made out in another's favor, so whoever the pictures belong to, they don't belong to you, right? Whoever this old duck is, she owns the pictures, right? I've a notion those pictures are quite a bit more important to you than that piddling little annuity from Culpeper Farm. And I've also a notion that something else is bugging you. That you're dead keen to get the whole thing sorted out and leave this country fast, aren't I right? He shot a keen look sideways at his father. Well, and can you wonder who'd want to stay in this god-awful climate? It's just the climate? It isn't anything to do with the Harold Marsham? Who the hell is Harold Marsham? The guy who was squashed by 16 tons of falling newsprint? There was a picture of him in this morning's Yorkshire Post, son of the matron of that home, at the home, not expected to survive. Why should I worry about him? I never even heard of him. Oh, said Russ calmly. Just because he was so uncommonly like me, I wondered if he could be another of your little by-blows. Dear old Dad, that's the trick to High Beck up there, isn't it? Seems to be something parked dead in the middle halfway up. That's the track to High Beck up there, isn't it? Seems to be something parked dead in the middle halfway up. We'll have to leave the truck here and walk. No, can't leave the truck here. Too many nosy people about, Wilby said hastily, looking up and down the deserted main street of Appleby under Scar. No, I'll tell you what, Russ. There's a waterboard metalled track that leaves the village a quarter of a mile to the east, cuts up behind Highbeck Cottage, and runs on over the moor past the reservoir. It's a good shortcut to Kirby. Couldn't do it in this weather in an ordinary car. It's not metalled the whole way, but we certainly can in that thing. Why don't you go along that way? You'll have to open a gate or two, and they'll have some cattle grids. But don't worry about the private signs. No one will be about in this weather, and I'll meet you up top. There's a little ordnance survey cairn where the path up from the cottage hits the tracks. Wait for me there. You seem to know this part of the country well for a guy who hasn't been back in 20 years. Oh, these parts don't change in generations, Wilby said easily. Sure you wouldn't like me to come along with you and add to the family atmosphere? No, don't you worry, Russ boy. In many ways, I think it'll be easier if I'm on my own. All I'm going to do is pass the time of day and see if the old girl is Aunt Fennel. No use in both of us getting soaked through, Wilby said virtuously. But shouldn't we offer to drive them back to the hall? Have some sense. How could we with all that stuff in the back? No, I'll see you at the cairn. Wilby zipped up his gray tartan parka, pulled down the flaps of his client-watching cap, and set off briskly up the track. Russ, after a last doubtful look at his stocky, retreating figure, turned the truck and drove eastwards along Appleby Village Street. Lots of water in that brook, Willoughby thought, striding uphill. Couldn't be handier conditions, really. Anybody might have an accident. Steep bank, bad visibility, slippery steps, so easy to tumble down and hit your head on a rock. So what, the other one did it too. The place is still just as dangerous, isn't it? And if the old lady were to fall, of course our brave little Lucy would go in after her, and she's got a dicky heart. It all adds up, as if it had been worked out by computer. Suppose they aren't in the cottage, though. But they must be. Where else could they be? Hark to the stream. Considerable lot of water coming down there. Nuisance about trousers getting wet. And he thought resentfully, What a lot of trouble to dispose of an old lady who ought to have died a long time ago. Anyone would think I had nothing better to do than drop all my other commitments and come trailing over to England. It's always the way. Want something done properly, you have to do it yourself. Wilby has seen to it. Wilby Culpepper will be the winner. Will be recognized as having more to him than anybody realized. Wilby will show them. As for know-it-all Lucy, with her bare toes and her threadbare jeans, setting herself up as an expert on art, princess of culture, squinting through her hair and despising me like some scrawny, supercilious little bird with her snide remarks and her offhand ways. As for that capsy little brat, just wait till I let her know. He came up to the tractor, passed it without particularly regarding it, and went on to stand in outraged disbelief by the broken bridge. It's bust. Can't get across. That's rubbish. There must be some way across, house and church on that side farther down. You can reach them by going back to the village and up the other side of the stream, yeah. But then there's that bit of cliff in between. Path from the back of the cottage up to the moor? Sure, but that's 3 miles round. Take me an hour. Meanwhile, Russ wondering where the hell I've got to. How long's the bridge been broken? Maybe old Aunt F didn't get to the cottage either. In which case, where is she? He stared at the bridge, dangling slats. Strand of wire trailing downstream. Might have been broken 5 minutes or 5 hours ago. Stared at the cottage. Its little dark windows stared back at him impassively. Might be someone inside, might not. Well, if they are in there, they are cut off, yes. But they won't starve. Lucy can walk up over the moor, down the waterboard track for help. And anyway, the beck will go down in 12 hours or so. I can't stay here 12 hours, though. He turned and moved away indecisively, trying to think of some plan, and came face to face with Harbin. "Hullo, Fred!" Wilby stood motionless, except that his round head on its bull neck tipped slightly backwards, as if his gyro control had shifted a point or two. He licked his lips slightly, then said, "Excuse me," and made to move past Harbin, but the pause had lasted too long. "Oh, no, Fred," Harbin said. "You know who I am." "Sorry, no idea. Look, I'm in a hurry." "You don't remember Flight 507, Liverpool to Boston? You were the drink steward wearing a canvas corset with 30,000 quid's worth of gold slung round your waist in 3 rows of dear little pockets. Don't you remember that? Fred? You must have a rotten memory." "My name's not Fred." "Now I remember that trip so well because that's when I lost my hand," Harbin said, and took a step forward. Wilby's nerve broke. He made a jerky movement to one side and then saw Gates looking down at him from the cab of the tractor. "I like your American accent, Fred. Tell us, then, what did you spend the cash on? Set yourself up in a nice little business, did you? Funnily enough, you know, it's not the 30,000 I begrudge. It's just this." He shook his empty sleeve. "It was those years in jail where you were living it up. I've thought about this meeting quite a lot." Wilby saw that there was no escape downhill past them, so he turned and ran up the track. No footsteps followed. For a moment of wild optimism, he thought that perhaps they had intended to do no more than give him a fright. Then he heard the tractor start up, with a grinding roar that drowned even the stream's voice. Glancing haggardly behind, he saw the tractor begin to move. He also saw his niece Lucy run out of the cottage and stand at the top of the steps, staring across the brown tossing water. Her face was very white. Her clothes were soaking. She called something. He could not catch the words. "Lucy!" he shouted. "Get help!" He knew she would not be able to hear him with the stream and the tractor. Anyway, what could she do? No phone at the cottage. She's a witness, though, he thought. They know she's seen them. They can't really do anything to... Now they know she's seen them. They can't really do anything to me. But he knew this was not true. They could, and they would. Desperately, he ran on uphill, slipping and stumbling on the wet, rocky track. Lucy went back into the cottage, sat down by Aunt Fennel on the window seat, and put an arm around her. "God knows what's going on, but I don't like it one bit. Were those 2 men in the tractor the ones who tied you up, Aunt Fen?" "Yes, dearie." "But who are they?" "Don't know." Strangely, Aunt Fennel, who should have been terrified, was not. Although very exhausted, she seemed quite serene, even cheerful. "Do you know," she confided, "it wasn't as bad as I expected, being jumped up. Doesn't that show you should never worry about things beforehand? Though I was glad when you came and untied me, of course, dearie. What's happening now?" "Those two men are chasing Uncle Wilby up the hill. Do you know why they're after him?" "No, dearie, I dare say. They have their reasons. It won't do him any harm to have a good fright." "I guess plenty of people have reasons for chasing Wilby." Lucy tried to control her chattering teeth. The cottage was bone-chillingly cold. "Aunt Fen, please tell me, is Uncle Wilby that other one? Do you believe that it was he who killed your friend?" Aunt Fennel peered out of the window, as if to make quite sure that Wilby was out of sight. The tractor had vanished round a bend in the track, and its roar had been replaced by the voice of the stream. What was happening farther up the hill? Lucy shivered again. "You see, he always had this habit at meals, even as a little boy," the old woman said irrelevantly. "He was so greedy. It was as if he wanted time to stop while he was eating. What do you suppose that'll do to him, dearie?" "I don't know, and quite honestly, I'm scared to think. Why should they grab you and tie you up? Didn't they say anything?" "Oh, one of them said something about a tethered goat. The other one was talking about someone called Bess." Lucy shook her head. She was too tired to try and understand it all. "We oughtn't stay here," she said, if they do something to Wilby. If they come back." Looking down at the windowsill, she saw a small gleaming lens in the dust. Idly, she pushed it with her finger. "They can't reach us here, dearie, with the bridge broken. It was wonderful you got across. The stream might go down again. Anyway, we're both wet and cold, and you haven't had your lunch. We could light the fire," Aunt Fennel suggested hopefully. Lucy shook her head. "No matches, I've looked, and all the wood's soaking. No, we mustn't stay, Aunt Fen." "But suppose Taffypuss comes back, and we're gone." "Oh, damn Taffypuss," Lucy thought wearily. Her wet clothes were dripping onto the granite flags. She squeezed Aunt Fennel's hand. "We'll come back another day and hunt for Taffypuss. You could even come back and live here if you liked, Aunt Fennel. Fiona says she'd come and look after you." "That would be nice, dearie, so long as that other one was dealt with, so he couldn't come and try any of his wickedness. It is such a dear little house, isn't it?" With Aunt Fennel in it, Lucy realized, Highbeck has lost its aura of anguish. She was what the house had wanted. "But I'd much rather you came and looked after me, dearie, if that other one was safely out of the way." "I'm going to be learning the piano, remember?" Lucy said gently. "But I'll come and visit very often." Aunt Fennel preserved a reproachful silence. After a while she said, "Anyway, I don't see how we can leave, dearie. I'm far too tired to walk 3 miles over the moor." Lucy said, "But didn't you tell me there's a kind of sheep track along the cliff to the church and Colonel Linton's?" "But that's so steep, dearie, and it'll be slippery as glass after all this rain. We'd never get along it." "We've got to," Lucy thought, slippery or not. She longed just to curl up in her wet clothes on the window seat and lean against Aunt Fennel and shut her eyes, regardless of cold, to doze and wait. And in the silent little house, wait in hopes that help would finally arrive. After all, Max had said he would ring the police in an hour and a half. But would the police immediately come to Highbeck? No, they would go to Wildfell Hall first. But they might not do that for several hours, if they had other calls to deal with. Several hours spent in sopping clothes in an unheated stone kitchen might well be the death of Aunt Fennel. Besides, what about those 2 men and Uncle Wilby? Should not something be done about them? "No, we must leave," Lucy decided, and she said, "I'm going to have a look at the sheep track. Back in a minute." The rain was still driving steadily down, although it would be several hours to dusk. The light was bad. A kind of heavy, saturated gloom hung in the Dean, and the tree-grown cliff looked dark and forbidding. However, when Lucy climbed along one of the terraces of the neglected garden, she found a wicket gate and a narrow little path, rabbit runway rather than sheep track, which disappeared through tangled growth along the steep bank. Well, at least there are plenty of bushes to grab if we slip, Lucy thought. She went back to the cottage. Come along, Aunt Fen, love. At least climbing will warm us up. I think we can make it, honestly. If you wait here much longer, you'll catch your death. I'm much happier staying in my dear little house, Aunt Fennel said piteously. And she added, with one of her occasional, devastatingly intrusive shafts, I expect you're anxious to get back and listen to some concert, are you? Why don't you go on ahead, dearie, and then presently you can bring your car up the waterboard track with some matches and dry wood, or wait till the beck has gone down. I'd much rather stay here. I'm not a bit afraid any more, Lucy said, trying to be patient. Aunt Fen, I simply can't leave you here on your own. And it's probably only 10 minutes' climb along to Colonel Linton's. Then we can sit and dry off in his nice warm kitchen, and he can phone Fiona, who will be worrying about us. She slipped a hand under Aunt Fennel's arm and gently but firmly hoisted her to her feet. Come on, love. That's the way. Think how pleased Colonel Linton will be to see you. Very reluctantly, Aunt Fennel let herself be steered to the door. Dear Max, it's perfectly true. I do want to get back in time for your Goldberg variations. But also, surely, what I'm doing is for the best. Russ glanced at his watch for the 20th time. What in heaven's name could the old boy be doing? If he was seizing the chance to polish off great Aunt Fennel, as Russ strongly suspected, he was taking a devilish long time about it. Was he slicing her up piecemeal? And what was happening to Lucy? I'll give him 10 minutes, 15, thought Russ. Then what'll I do? I suppose a water board official comes up to make sure the reservoir's not overflowing, and asks what the hell I'm doing here? I do not like that prospect at all. He glanced uneasily behind him along the raised track on which he had parked the Land Rover. The reservoir showed no signs of overflowing, but it was painfully over its usual high water mark. It lay behind him, a great pewter-colored lake, stretching for a couple of miles in either direction, sullen, flat, except for the tiny stalagmites of water that rose to meet the forest of rain coming down out of the sky. In front of Russ, the land fell away. Eastwards, on his right, stood the little cairn, marking some ordnance survey point. Beginning to be cold, Russ got down and walked along the concrete lip of the reservoir, which presently described a sharp curve paralleled by the track, and rose in graceful steps to the beginning of the dam. Below the dam, a rocky, tree-scattered valley descended toward Kirby, and the track shot steeply down in it in a series of zigzags. Hope Wilby turns up before it gets dark, Russ thought. Otherwise, I'm going back and round. I don't fancy taking that track at night in this weather. He had walked back and forth between cairn and dam a half a dozen times, was just turning away from the cairn when he heard a shout. Pausing, he stared down the steepish path, which led over the moor in the direction of Appleby. Someone was running up it. Wilby? When the figure came a bit closer, he recognized the gaudy tartan parka, and something was following him, a darker patch in the general gray of the rain. Its pace was too slow, its engine too noisy for a car. It appeared to have some swinging extension out front. A breakdown truck? When it came closer, he recognized the tractor with its hedge-cutting shear mechanism. What the hell's going on? Thought Russ, with calm, objective interest. What's Wilby gotten himself into now? As the tractor appeared to be chasing Wilby, veering from side to side as he tacked erratically up the hillside, keeping within snatch range of him, every now and then making a grab at him with its shears, which consisted of 2 blades set against 2 dovetailing rows of rake teeth. Kind of teasing him, thought Russ. They could have caught him up and run him down long ago if they'd wanted to, so what's the idea? Dropping behind the embankment out of view, Russ made his way back to the Land Rover, which, where it stood, was concealed from the approaching tractor by a heather-grown hummock. He had noticed that the tractor was chivying. Wilby, herding him as a collie urges a flock in one particular direction away from the path, up the steeper hillside toward the lip of the reservoir, Russ quietly started his engine, got into gear, and waited. The chase was hidden from him now. Suddenly he heard an appalling shriek, so loud, so prolonged, that it sounded more like a machine misused than any human cry. He heard the tractor change key and stammer in its roar. Then it came into view, heaving up and on to the track that circled the reservoir. Wilby ahead of it, running lurchingly toward the dam. They hadn't actually done for him yet. Then, thought Russ dispassionately. He shot forward in pursuit. The two men in the tractor were not expecting to see another vehicle, and the Land Rover took them by surprise. For an instant it hung alongside, 2 wheels on the track, 2 on the heather, and scree. Then it was past and cutting in sharply, where the water edge curved, and the track veered to the left. The tractor swerved and tilted. "Watch it, you fool!" yelled Gates, who was driving, to Harbin, who, leaning over his shoulder, was operating the crane. Harbin startled out of his usual impassivity by the sudden swerve, pulled the wrong lever, and the crane swung over and down to the left, fatally adding to the tractor's imbalance. The high, top-heavy vehicle teetered for a moment on the extreme lip of the great concrete bowl, then fell sideways down into the gray water and disappeared. Russ missed the moment when this happened, having cut in. He spun his steering wheel to the right and accelerated to put himself between the tractor and Wilby. It was out of his rearview mirror at the instant when it overbalanced. When he looked in his mirror, the track behind him empty. Startled, incredulous, he looked again, jamming on his brakes, then stopped and stared at the reservoir, in which huge black and steel concentric circles were shooting out far across the water. "Holy cow," said Russ. He ran the Land Rover backwards to the torn spot on the bank where it had occurred, and peered down. Nothing could be seen except a great dark crack in the concrete rim, running far down out of sight. "Russ! Russ!" Wilby's faint voice echoed along the bank. Russ jerked into forward gear and ran the Land Rover along to the dam, against which Wilby was leaning in a hunched position, holding one arm with the other, blood streaming down his parka. Russ looked at his right arm and then away again. "Can you put a tourniquet on this?" Wilby said hoarsely, and then get me to a doctor fast." Using a spanner, Russ twisted a scarf round the mangled arm. Who were they?" he inquired. "Old pals?" Wilby glanced behind him. The water was calm again, non-committal. "Never mind," he said. "For God's sake, just forget them." "I don't know," said Russ uneasily. "Oughtn't we report that we saw the tractor go in? It's cracked the reservoir bed. Maybe all the water will escape." "Someone will notice soon enough. Let's just get away from here." "Was it on account of that pair that you were keen to come to England?" Russ asked, helping Wilby into the Land Rover. Wilby did not answer the question. "Brandy in my hip flask," he muttered. Tears and blood from a gash in his cheek ran down his face when Russ had found the flask and given him a swallow. "Did anybody see you come up this way?" "Not a soul." Russ had started up again and was driving with extreme caution toward the zigzag track into Kirby. "Nothing to connect us, then, and I dare say Harbin wasn't the owner of the tractor." Wilby stopped short, but Russ took him up. "Harbin, that rings a bell. He was the escaped convict, the gold smuggler, right? They reckoned his pal who was released that fall must have helped him escape. Oh, now I see the whole thing. You must have nipped over here for a quick visit from Stuttgart last summer while Rose and Coral were in Florida and before the first guy, Gates, was his name, wasn't it, was released. I have a notion you meant to get rid of old Aunt Fennel then. Why? Maybe because she was the one person in England who knew your whereabouts? Or did you just want those pictures? Of course you didn't want to leave it till after Gates was out and maybe looking for you. Am I right in guessing that you were the third member of the gang, the one who crawled out of that crashed plane and made off with all the loot? When asked to hand it to you, Dad, you certainly seized your chances. In fact, the only mistake you ever made was to push the wrong old girl into the river, wasn't it? Or was that it? Oh, God, Russ, stop talking and drive a bit faster, can't you? And then everything was a mess. The old lady was maybe still alive, or anyway, you couldn't be sure if she was alive She was a link with you. She knew your address in America, and Gates had come out of prison and might have some reason for connecting you with Apley. Evidently did, and all you could think of was to send over little Lucy to sort matters out. That wasn't smart. You'd much better have sent me. Wilby was silent. Suddenly he realized how much he hated Russ. God, I'm saddled with him for life now, he thought. Why do my kids turn out so badly? Puny little Lucy's the only decent one of the bunch. With any guts, shame she wasn't mine. You realize we can hardly go along to this Doc Adnan surgery with a crate load of stolen art in the back, Russ said. There's a first aid place in the front promenade, Wilby said. Right opposite that big underground car park. I noticed it this morning. You can go there. Okay, I guess this is Kirby now. And thank God, my arms are just about wrenched out with nursing this monster round these bends. Wilby said nothing. He sat holding his arm. Gray, sweating, but calm. Things aren't working out too badly, he thought. And that is the end of chapter 11.